I didn't get the example. What is cruel there?
The way the veal is raised, typically most people consider that to be somewhat cruel.
Well, I don't know about the veal, but certainly it's true about goose, that you feed them in order to make the liver more fatty. I don't know how healthy it is nowadays, but it sells better. And if you overfeed them, it causes cruelty, but then you can sell better. That is really a debatable question halachically. Where are the limits here? Is it still within the purpose, the useful purposes of human beings, and therefore it's permissible, or is the purpose just to gain money not sufficient to cause such an amount of cruelty? And that is really a debatable question. It raises other halachic questions because in the process of doing it, occasionally you tear the esophagus because you overfeed them forcefully. And then the goose becomes treifa. And then you can't eat it. So you are doing something in order to make more money and you're losing all of your money. So even economically, it's not always a good advice to do it. There's a big debate about it. But again, the issue is, where do you draw the line between what is permissible for human use and how much cruelty is inflicted in order to obtain this gain? And is it within this permissible realm? The best example, halachically stated, is a Remo, Moshe Isserlich, who wrote additions to the Shulchan Aruch, and in a place which you wouldn't expect it, in Even HaEzer, he has a comment that you are allowed to tear off the feathers of a goose in order to use it as a pen. You know, they didn't have pens, they had feathers. And these feathers were used to write. But this is a significant pain to just tear off from a living goose the feathers in order to use it. And he says it's permissible, because this, according to him, is the balance that is a use which is important for human beings, and the amount of pain inflicted in order to obtain it is not sufficient to prohibit it. Now, how do you compare this example to each and every example of modern life? So that is the way the debates are related.
There's a very disturbing letter to the editor of the Jewish Press, and I know they're giving it out here, which I read, and I was very tempted, had I not been here today, to write a very strong letter back. There is a vegan, a professor who speaks at many conferences, who's very anti-animal cruelty, and he writes a very strong letter attacking the facts of women wearing their mink coats to shul. Now, based on what I heard from you, that killing an animal is not an inyan of cruelty at all.
Right.
Is there any problem with raising minks to make fur coats for women?
No. So again, from a halachic point of view, it is not cruelty to animals because you kill the animal, and there's no cruelty involved. And killing animals, in order to use them, we are doing it all day long. We are eating meat, right? So this particular person, I don't know if he eats meat, but if he eats meat, why shouldn't he wear a fur coat?
He's a vegan.
Okay, but all those who eat meat, they do it because sacrificing an animal is not a cruelty by definition, by halachic definition. And therefore, if you need to sacrifice animals in order to wear their fur, and it makes you happy and warm and it's useful, I don't see any, I don't know, I'm not aware of any of the poskim who said that is forbidden. I think that the issue there is that you need many animals in order to make one fur coat. And therefore, it is a matter of amount, that you're sacrificing so many animals for a purpose which to them, to those who oppose it, is not an important purpose. But the number of sacrificed animals per se has no halachic bearing. It is only the cruelty.
Yes. You mentioned about Adam Rishon being a vegetarian. I came across this year Sisis Achomi, which talks about Rashi that specifically he was forbidden to slaughter animals to eat them, but animals, and from Rashi's expression, that the animals that died, he was able to eat. So the concept of the future, this, what Cook wrote, they're saying this, time that will be, everybody will be a vegetarian. But if it's saying that reaching that time, so they won't be killing animals. I mean, that opinion, are you familiar with that?
Well, there is a debate whether Adam Arishon was only forbidden to kill animal in order to eat, but to eat he was permitted, or whether he was forbidden altogether not to eat meat. According to Rav Kook, the position is that he was forbidden altogether, and therefore his vision is to come back to the same time. That is his position.
Otherwise?
Just one specific, because I think that probably Dr. Foreman made a presentation because your one specific issue that you brought up regarding undomesticated animals. But certainly I think the general scientific world would not distinguish between domesticated and undomesticated, and I'm wondering if you had a specific mark for it, because the Shivas of the Note of Yehuda that talk about hunting, that you alluded to earlier in the presentation, are talking about undomesticated animals. I wasn't familiar with the difference. I was familiar with the difference between lower life forms, but not familiar with the difference between domesticated or undomesticated.
The position of domesticated and undomesticated is the position of the Yavitz. The Yavitz has a tshuva that there is a distinction between domestic and undomesticated, and between harmful and non-harmful. He makes these distinctions. Others make a distinction between lower forms of life, flies and insects and so on, and higher levels of. So there are various opinions on what types of animals the Tzar Ba'alei Chaim applies. By the way, there's also a debate whether Tzar Ba'alei Chaim applies to human beings. There are also Ba'alei Chaim, and if you inflict pain on a human being, obviously there's Isur Chovel and other prohibitions, but some say that it is also prohibited because you're inflicting pain on a creature. A human being is not less than a lion or a dog. We assume that he is more, but not less. So if you're not allowed to inflict pain on a dog, certainly you're not allowed to inflict pain on a human being. Others hold that this does not apply, that you need a specific law for animals because they don't have other protecting laws to protect them. But human beings, you're not allowed to inflict pain and suffering because of other laws, so you don't need this one to add it. So these are all forms of, but the Yavitz makes this distinction.
But the question that I also thought of as you were discussing that has to do with laboratory mice and laboratory rats. On the one hand, you could consider them domesticated in certain ways. So if you use the wild mice from the fields, would you be able to do things that you're not allowed to with the...
Yeah, domesticated and non-domesticated are not necessarily defined halachically the way they are defined zoologically or scientifically. Domesticated usually means those that you keep in order to use them while being alive. For instance, you keep a dog in order to guide the blind or to guard your house, and you keep a cow in order to take her milk, and so on. You don't keep mice in order to do something for you, unless you keep it to do an experiment. So then they are not domesticated. They are just for the purpose of using them. So halachically, they would not be considered domesticated animals, even if you keep them in your laboratory, not wild mice.
Dr. Goldman?
Well, a contemporary rabbi recently published something indicating that if that's the case, on lower forms, upper forms, use traps, bee traps, because it's Tzar Ba'alei Chaim to the bees. There is a day like that that you might get the also. Both of us we probably don't believe in that. But I would refer you to what you said about Kol Merachim al Zolit. There is an epilogue to a book called The Scourge of the Swastika. The Scourge of the Swastika was written by Lord Russell, who was the British prosecutor at Nuremberg. And he was a very cold and very, the book talks mostly about the Nazi crimes against the British soldiers and the Allied soldiers. And he's very, very scientific and legal, and everything he describes is how many prisoners of war they've used, etc., etc. In the end, in his epilogue, he has a beautiful epilogue in which he says that when the Nazis, when the Allied forces opened up the camps, the death camps in Auschwitz, they found the most elaborate birdhouses. The Nazis were very, very, very big on Tsar Balakau. And they were very, very nice to the birds at the same time they were killing Jews. Well.
Thank you for your comment.
I just want to respond to a couple of things that the questioner asked. First of all, with regard to laboratory animal science, there's a big distinction made between vertebrate and invertebrate animals, and you mentioned bees. There are many fewer restrictions on what you can do with invertebrates. Secondly, bees are dangerous animals, and they can cause us harm. So that first comment of yours, I think that it's justified just on the basis of being harmed by a certain creature, that we should be able to trap them. The third point that you made about the Nazis is a very, very good point. Nazis, in terms of Nazi medicine, they were very much opposed to animal experimentation, insisting on using Jews as research subjects as being the best way to do the experiments, rather than inflicting pain on animals. And that's one of the tragedies of the Holocaust, of course.
I would like just to add one other point. The animal rights ideology, I think, is penetrating more and more into the general public. A colleague of mine in Israel did a survey amongst medical students, Israeli medical students, and the question was, if there is a drowning ship and there is one boat that can hold either a child or a dog, who would you save? And about 50% had difficulty to answer. So I'm pointing it to the fact that animal rights has penetrated to a degree that it becomes really inhumane in a sense, and they are medical students in Israel. Who? Holland. Right.
Unfortunately,
But they allow euthanasia.
I want to thank Dr. Sternberg and Dr. William.